Today we're in Elland and this is the EU referendum debate.
Welcome to Question Time.
A warm welcome to the Year 8 and Year 9 Brooksbank School EU referendum debate. A specially invited audience are gathered here to ask questions on the all-important vote next week on whether the UK should leave or remain a member of the European Union. Joining me on the panel to discuss the issues surrounding the historic referendum are 4 members of the Brooksbank Debating Club. Arguing that the UK should leave the EU are Adam Ryan of 8R and Jamie Booth of 8N, and supporting the Remain campaign are Conor Skeffington of 9U and Archie Donnelly of 9D. Let's kick off with a question from Isaac.
What will be the impact on immigration if we leave the EU?
I'm going to hand over to Archie. Can you kick us off with that?
I think there will be little to no effects on immigration if we leave the EU. As for non-EU immigrants, we already have a point system, and if we put one in place for EU migrants, then, well, if half of the non-EU get in, then surely some of the EU will get in.
Okay. What do we think about that, Adam?
I think it would be impossible to control as members of the EU because there are like too many police forces that are trying to tackle it at once.
So you're referring to the migrant crisis?
Yeah.
So, do you think there's a crisis with migration?
I think there is a crisis with migration, but we still wouldn't be able to control it if we did leave the EU. And if we did, it would be so small of an effect that it wouldn't really matter. And it would just be wasting our partnership with the EU to get rid of a few immigrants, really.
But 250,000 EU migrants come to the UK every year. That puts pressure on schools, hospitals, housing.
But if you look at how they benefit the economy, they put money in, and many results show that they put more in than they take out, so that should compensate for the schools and hospitals being used.
Adam, do you agree with that they put money into the UK economy?
I'm not really sure, I don't think so because like public services are under strain from migrants.
So it's costing money.
And it is easier for migrants to come to the UK.
Okay, interesting issue. That issue, the migration issue, is one of the biggest ones during this debate. And I'm talking about migration, what about if we look at it the other way around? Let's move on to another question.
How would trade be affected by leaving the EU?
So, that question I'd like to ask Archie first of the Remain campaign.
I think trade would be affected because people, well, other countries would feel less joined with us, and it would damage diplomatic relations if we left, and then we'd probably get less beneficial deals when trading with other countries.
Because we get a special deal, don't we? By trading with EU countries, we get basically better rates in our trade deals. Because when we trade with France or Germany, they treat us as kind of friends, really, because we're part of their club. What do you think about that, Adam?
I think that because if we left, we'd be able to negotiate our own trade deals.
Who with, though?
With other countries.
Such as like China?
France.
Oh, yeah.
And we'd be able to, we are still part of the World Trade Organization.
So we're not limited to the EU, are we? We can trade with other countries around the world. That's interesting because that's something that a lot of people argued. We're getting a bit ripped off apparently, but maybe other countries can offer us things cheaper. We know China is the workshop of the world, so maybe it might be better to go that way. Linked into that question is one to do with our food prices and basically how much our supermarket shop is going to cost.
How might food prices be affected if we leave the EU?
So Jamie, you're part of the Leave campaign. How do you think food prices will be affected? Because we're told that if we leave the EU, food prices will go through the roof.
Well, if we do leave the EU, food prices may increase slightly, but we're still allies with people like Germany and France and Italy, members of the EU. So it's not like we're losing our alliance with them. So we should still have reasonable prices on imports from their countries.
Okay, so we don't think we're going to annoy them and upset them if we leave. That's interesting. Archie, what do you think about that question about food prices?
About imports first, imports would go up because that's a major benefit of being in the EU, and this could include other things like cars, and I know this isn't about food, but it affects us anyway, it affects us still. And food prices will go up because 40% of the EU's budget given to us is farming and agriculture, so then that would be taken away, increasing the amount of pressure put on farmers, and we wouldn't be able to import as many goods, so they wouldn't have enough money to develop to deal with the loss of imports and dependence on ourselves.
But the Leave campaign is telling us that we can have lower prices if prices won't go up, they actually get lower because of our deals with countries outside of the EU, and as well as staying in touch with our EU partners.
Well, we still wouldn't have the funding, so we wouldn't be able to develop then. And that's what the Leave campaign would say, isn't it? I don't want to sound.
Oh, of course, you're one-sided. You're in the Remain campaign, so your view is.
They'll be one-sided as well.
Of course, definitely. Would you like to respond to that, Jamie? Do you think Archie's right that food prices will rocket? Obviously, you've answered a little bit about that, but do you think he's
Well, there might be more pressure on agriculture and people that work in that industry, but surely then we'll have more people that go into that industry because there's more opportunity for jobs rather than putting pressure on other parts of our workforce, like tertiary business, which is already well occupied in our country.
But it says that 3 million jobs in the UK are linked to trade. So if we leave the EU, those jobs might be lost. Is that something you agree with, Connor? Do you think we might lose those jobs? Is it an issue, or is it too difficult to tell? No worries. Archie, would you like to add something?
Well, regarding the fact that more people go into farming, honestly, I don't think that farms could hold that capacity because, for example, they won't be able to store all the yield they've got, and we'd soon run out of farming space because the farmers have to buy more. They don't have enough money to hire people, so they won't be able to develop like straight away. They'd have to save up, and that would lead to food shortages.
Gosh, that's terrifying, that, isn't it, the prospect? But obviously the prospect of maybe cheaper food prices is quite exciting. Okay, let's move on to a question from Maria.
What will affect people our age the most if we exit the EU?
So, thinking about us, right? What do you think, Connor?
Nothing specific would happen to people in our age group. Of course, all the things affecting us would affect adults as well. Although there are certain schemes in place within the EU in education which could make prices to study abroad with better professors more expensive.
What about schools though? Because we talked earlier about the fact that apparently 250,000 EU migrants are coming to the UK every year. They will obviously come with children, some of them, so they're going to need to be educated. So people your age are going to maybe find classes over here. There'll be more students in your classes. Is that a worry?
Not really, because there are, with every migrant that comes into the country from the EU, there are people within the UK.
Yes, of course, because Britain has many people who go and live in Spain or go and work in other countries such as Australia and New Zealand. What do we feel about that, Jamie? How's this going to affect our age group?
Well, if there are more children in class, that means there's more children in school, and then schools have to provide resources for children, and that means you need more teachers and you need more food for children to eat, and then that puts pressure on the school's resources, so they can't provide out of school hours activities, and then that's beneficial to children's education.
But it's great, you get this cultural exchange, don't you? Because when people from other European countries here, they bring their foods that we can try, and they try out the language and get to know their lifestyle. Surely that's a good thing.
Yeah, but at this point, after all the time we've been in the EU, I think we already have most of the cultures from Europe, and even if we leave Europe, we can still get cultures from other places in the world.
So we can still take part and learn about other countries at the same time. Is that something you want to add to?
I just want to add to, I know someone whose parent is a descendant of migrants, and she works in the education business,
Yeah, in education.
Yeah, in education. So let's say that maybe 1 in every 100 migrants gets a job in some sort of education, one of children. Surely that would benefit the amount of would benefit education as well, because you've got more staff, and at the moment there's a lot of spaces in teaching.
So you're saying that there'll be opportunities for jobs for teachers to come and work with those students, and the fact that we'll need more staff and therefore that'll increase the economy. Is that what you're arguing?
Yeah, and the fact that there is a shortage of teachers. There has been a shortage of teachers at one point, so that will mean that there's more people who can do it, which would actually reduce the amount of children in each class.
Okay, so there's opportunities for employment. Interesting. Lydia, we've got a question from you.
What is the single most important reason for staying or leaving the EU?
Connor, what would the
The Remain campaign argue is the single most important reason for staying in the EU.
Well, there's many things that the EU gives us and we give into the EU, but the most important thing is the fact that we are in the EU, and the EU is a symbol of stability in Europe. And if the UK decided they wanted to leave, then the rest of the EU might not take kindly to that, and this could lead to political tensions and possibly war.
Wow, scaremongering there. Let's go over to Jamie then. What's the single most important reason for leaving the EU?
If we do leave the EU, we spend hundreds of millions of pounds on staying in the EU every year, so we could have those funds to fund the NHS, which is currently in a bit of a problem with money, and you could put it into schools. And if something did happen, like a war, we'd have funds to put into
So like a war chest then, so we can use that money to spend on defence.
Yeah.
That's interesting. But the EU, apparently, according to the Remain campaign, gives us, for every £1, we get £10 back. What's that money spent on?
That figure isn't exactly accurate.
Well, that's what the Remain campaign is saying.
We do spend some money to keep our membership in the EU, but the EU also gives us lots of money back, and that's put into many different departments within the UK.
Yeah, a lot of projects in the UK are funded by the EU, and lots of areas, particularly areas of poverty, do receive money from the EU to support their industry and also education as well. Is it worth it though? £10 for every £1?
Well, if we got rather than spending the money and then seeing if we got that back, it could be less as more countries join.
So not give it away in the first place?
Yeah, and then you could have it to spend on what you want, rather than if other countries join, you might not get £10 back, it might be £9 next year, then £8, and it could slowly decrease.
An interesting point, because the EU membership has grown. Its original membership was 9 countries. We're now up to 28, with many other countries interested in joining as well, such as Turkey and Serbia. Right, couple more questions. Let's go to a question from Cassia.
What is the worst thing that will happen to Britain if we leave the EU?
What's the worst thing that will happen to Britain if we leave the EU? So an opposite question then. Archie, would you like to take that one?
Well, I think Scotland, 90% of the people in Scotland are going into the polls. I think we should stay in the EU, and they only stayed in by about 4% last time. So Scotland would leave, so all of this about us retaining our sovereignty.
Scotland would leave the UK?
I think
so. We'd also lose our membership in the EU and also lose one of our
and people
countries.
say that it will retain our sovereignty, but actually we're losing the United Kingdom in effect, because it'll only be England, Wales and Northern Ireland.
Okay. What does the Leave campaign think of that? What's the worst that could happen? Probably nothing.
Yeah. Nothing significant could happen that affects England, and even if Scotland do leave, there are still 3 other countries in the United Kingdom, and it's not like if England left the UK, there'd be a lot less of the United Kingdom left, and Scotland isn't a major part of the United Kingdom. So even if Scotland left and we left the EU, we'd still get benefits from Wales and Northern Ireland.
Okay, so we're still a significant country. Archie, do you want to respond to that?
Well, if Scotland leave, that might prompt Wales to leave, because they've got their own parliament, they've got their own, they've got Plaid Cymru or Plaid Cymru, I don't know how it's said, but...
Yeah, Plaid Cymru, yeah.
Yeah, Plaid Cymru, and they would effectively just... They've got their own parliament. They're like Scotland.
So has Northern Ireland, so you're suggesting a domino effect?
I think there will be, because Wales and Northern Ireland, in a way, were effectively just Scotland a few years ago, because that's how it started before the SNP got power, and now it has every seat in Scotland.
So we could have England left alone with Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland as independent countries.
And I think that would drain resources, because Scotland, if they do leave, they will be trying to cling on to oil and other natural resources, but we trade with the EU.
Scotland, of course, is a very oil and gas-rich country, so we rely on them for money. Let's round off with this question here from Kira.
If we leave the EU, are we likely to be allowed back in?
So if we leave the club, are they going to let us back in? Adam, for the Leave campaign, what do you think? If we do leave and it's a mad panic, do you think they'll say we'll come back?
I think we will, but even though it might take a bit of a long time, we can still get back in.
Why is that though? Don't they say you've left us? Are we a rich enough country to be allowed back in, do you think?
I mean, we have like the 6th most richest country in the world, so we should be allowed back in, and we all do help each other.
Okay, interesting point. What do we think on the Remain side?
Well, if something does go wrong, we won't be the 6th most richest country in the world, because people are saying recession will happen again, which will mean less people have got jobs. So the 20 billion that's double what we pay each year, which is over double which we pay each year, won't be able to pay back, because we'll effectively, the only thing that can go wrong is that we go bankrupt.
We go bankrupt.
And we're in debt anyway, but it'll increase, and then we won't have any more money to spend, and stuff like education, the NHS will get even worse. The NHS might even become privatised, so people would have to pay to, stay healthy.
Is that doom-mongering too much, do we think?
Well, I know that I already go to private dentists, so people do already pay for health services.
Okay.
So, as it is, so if they did have to pay for the NHS, I can't see why that'd be a problem if people already do pay for things like the dentist.
Okay. Right, well, we'll leave it on that controversial point in what is a controversial debate. So that's where we're going to bring the debate to a close. My thanks to the audience for your brilliant questions.
Welcome to Question Time.